In the bustling streets of Ibadan, a poor but kind-hearted man named Samuel gives his last coin to a desperate young girl named Janet, who has lost her way and her only chance at survival. Years pass and Samuel, now old and forgotten, lives in obscurity, mocked even by his own family. But during a lavish corporate gala in Lagos, a mysterious billionaire CEO arrives and turns the entire room silent. It's Janet. She's returned to repay the man who once saved her life, and to expose everyone who treated him like dirt. Before the whispers in Lagos, before the glass towers and the hushed gossip, there was only the noise of Ibadan, the real noise, the kind that gets into your bones and stays there. It was the sound of life for Samuel, a man whose world was a small one-room apartment in the heart of the city, a place where the walls were thin and the dreams were even thinner. Samuel was a widower. His wife Maria had been taken by a fever years ago, leaving him with 2 children and a heart that never quite healed. He had her photograph faded and soft at the edges tucked away in an old biscuit tin. Sometimes late at night when the city finally slept, he would take it out and talk to her. He'd tell her about their children, David and Funk. He'd tell her how much he missed her laughter. David, at 14, was already growing a shell around his heart. He saw the world for what it was, hard and unforgiving. He watched his father work his fingers raw for pennies and saw no reward in it. He loved his father, but a bitter seed was planting itself in his soul. Funk, younger by 2 years, was her father's shadow. She had his gentle eyes and his quiet strength. She believed in the goodness he preached even when their stomachs were empty. Their home was simple. A single mattress took up most of the floor. A kerosene stove sat in one corner, and a small wooden table with 2 wobbly chairs stood in the other. Their clothes hung on a rope strung across the room. It wasn't much, but Samuel made it a home. He filled it with stories, with prayers, and with a love so fierce it felt like its own kind of warmth. Every morning started the same. Samuel would wake before the sun, say his prayers, and boil a small pot of watery pap. He'd wake the children gently. David, my son, Funk, my treasure, time to wake up. This particular morning there was a spark of excitement in the air. Samuel had worked for 3 days straight hauling sacks of rice at Doug Market until his back screamed in protest. He had earned just enough to make a promise. Today, he announced as he poured the thin porridge into their bowls, today we will eat rice and stew with 1 piece of chicken each. David's eyes, usually clouded with teenage moodiness, widened slightly. For real, Baba? Funk clapped her hands, a wide grin spreading across her face. Chicken, Baba. You promise? Samuel smiled, a tired but genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp, clean 500 note. It was his entire earnings from the backbreaking work. He held it up like a trophy. I promise, after I finish my work today, I will go to the market and buy everything. Tonight we feast. That 500 note felt like ₦1,000,000. It was more than just food. It was a symbol of hope. It was a father's promise to his children that just for one night things would be better. He sent the children off to their small community school, reminding them to work hard. Your education is the only wealth I can give you. He'd always say, guard it well. Then he went to work. Today's job was helping a trader clear out a blocked drainage channel in front of his shop. It was dirty, smelly work. The sun beat down on his neck, and the thick black sludge clung to his arms and legs. Other men half his age would have complained, but Samuel worked with a quiet dignity. His mind focused on the image of his children's happy faces when he brought home the chicken. As the afternoon wore on, the sky began to change. The bright, unforgiving sun disappeared behind a thick blanket of bruised purple clouds. The air grew heavy and still. An old woman selling roasted plantains started packing up her wares. The rain is coming, she mumbled to him, a bad one. She was right. It started with a few fat drops splattering into the dust like dark coins. Then, without warning, the heavens ripped open. The rain didn't just fall, it attacked. It came down in solid, blinding sheets, turning the streets into fast-flowing rivers of brown water. The roar was deafening. People screamed and ran for cover. Clutching their belongings, market stalls collapsed under the weight of the water. Samuel huddled under the small overhang of the shop, his work forgotten. The drainage he had just cleared was now overflowing, churning with litter and mud. He knew he wouldn't be paid for the half-finished job. A cold knot of disappointment tightened in his stomach. The 500 in his pocket suddenly felt very small, very vulnerable. It was in that chaos that he saw her. A little girl no older than 10 stood alone in the middle of the deluge. She was drenched, her thin dress clinging to her small frame. She wasn't running. She was just standing there, turning in frantic circles, her face a mask of pure terror, tears mixed with the rain streaming down her cheeks. She was crying, but the sound was swallowed by the storm. Something in Samuel's heart broke. He saw his own funk in her. Without a second thought, he left the safety of his shelter and waded into the churning water toward her. The current was strong, pushing against his legs. "Hey, small girl," he shouted over the rain, "what is it? Where are your parents?" She finally saw him, her eyes wide with panic. "My bag." She wailed, her voice thin and reedy. "My black bag. I lost it." "A bag?" Samuel asked, getting closer. He put a gentle hand on her shoulder to steady her. What was in the bag? Her body was trembling from cold or fear. He couldn't tell. "Everything," she sobbed, her chest heaving. "It was my mother's money for the hospital. She's sick, very sick. The doctor said if we don't pay today, She couldn't finish the sentence. She just broke down into desperate, gut-wrenching sobs. Samuel's heart plummeted. He understood. This wasn't about a lost toy or some pocket money. This was life and death. Okay, calm down," he said, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. "What is your name?" "Janet," she whispered. "Okay, Janet, I am Samuel. We will find your bag. Where did you last see it?" For the next half an hour, in the pouring, relentless rain, Samuel and Janet searched. He held her hand tightly so she wouldn't be swept away. They looked under stalls, in the gutters, behind piles of rubbish that the water was pushing along the street. He asked traders who were trying to save their own goods. "Did you see a small black bag?" he'd yell. Most just shook their heads, too busy with their own problems. One man barked at him, "Get out of the way, old man. Can't you see we are all suffering?" The hope in Janet's eyes began to fade with every passing minute, replaced by a chilling despair. The bag was gone. The water had swallowed it. Finally, shivering and defeated, Samuel led her back to the shelter of the shop front. Janet was no longer crying. She was unnervingly quiet, staring into the rain with empty eyes. The fight had gone out of her. Samuel looked at her, and his own problems, the lost wages. The canceled chicken dinner felt like nothing. He saw a child whose world was ending. He thought of Maria. He thought of what she would have done. Slowly he reached into his wet trousers, his fingers searching for the note he had guarded so carefully. He pulled out the 500. It was damp, but it was still whole. His children's feast, his promise. He looked at the money, then he looked at the little girl's broken face. There was no choice to make. There was only the right thing to do. He knelt in front of her so they were at eye level. "Janet," he said softly. She didn't look at him. "Janet, look at me." She slowly turned her gaze towards him. He held out the money. "Take this." She stared at the note, confused. What is that?" "It's not much," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but maybe it can help for your mother." Janet's eyes filled with disbelief. She looked from the money to his face, to his worn-out clothes and kind, tired eyes. "But it's yours," she whispered. "Money is just paper," he said, pushing the note into her small, cold hand and closing her fingers around it. "A person's life is everything. Go to your mother. Don't waste any more time." Tears started streaming down her face again, but these were different tears. They weren't tears of fear, but of overwhelming, unbelievable gratitude. She threw her little arms around his neck and hugged him tightly. "Thank you," she choked out. "Thank you, sir." He patted her back. "God be with you, little one." He watched her as she clutched the money to her chest and ran off into the rain, disappearing into the gray curtain of the storm. Samuel stood there for a long time, the rain still pouring around him, feeling a strange mix of emptiness and peace. His pocket was empty, his stomach was empty, but his heart felt full. He walked home slowly, the storm finally beginning to soften. He arrived at his door, drenched and tired, with nothing to offer his children but an explanation. They were waiting for him, their faces pressed against the window. "Baba," Funk cried, opening the door, "you are soaked. Did you get the chicken?" David stood behind her, his arms crossed, a hopeful look on his face. Samuel walked in and sat down heavily on the edge of the mattress. He looked at his two children, the lights of his life. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy. "There will be no rice and stew tonight." He told them what happened. He told them about the little girl, about her sick mother and the lost bag. Funk listened with wide, compassionate eyes, but David's face hardened. The hope in his eyes curdled into resentment. "So you gave our food money away?" David asked, his voice sharp with disbelief, to a stranger, a girl who was probably lying. "David," Samuel began. "We have nothing, Baba." David's voice rose, cracking with frustration. "We have nothing, and you give away the one good thing we were going to have. It's not fair." He turned and went to the corner of the room, his back to his father. Funk walked over and quietly took her father's hand. She leaned her head against his arm. "You did a good thing, Baba," she whispered. Samuel squeezed her hand, his heart aching with his son's anger but warmed by his daughter's understanding. He looked at the empty spot where their feast was supposed to be, and he prayed. He prayed for the little girl named Janet and her mother, and he prayed that one day his own son would understand. He never expected an answer. He never expected to see her again. He certainly never expected that a single damp 500 note given away in a storm would be the seed of a hurricane that was coming for them all. The seasons in Ibadan don't change much, but people do. Years slip by like water through cupped hands, and they carved new lines onto Samuel's face, turning the black in his hair to a soft, dusty gray. The world he knew began to move faster than he could keep up with. New buildings sprouted from the red earth, glossy and tall, casting long shadows over the old familiar places. The price of bread, of kerosene, of everything seemed to climb a ladder that had no top. Samuel, however, remained at the bottom, growing older, slower, and more invisible with each passing day. His children, the two anchors of his life, were the first to drift away. David, his son, was consumed by the hunger his father never had, a hunger for things. He finished secondary school and refused to learn a trade. "I'm not going to break my back for nothing like you, Baba," he'd said, the words a casual sting. He fell in with a crowd that had shiny shoes and fast tongues, chasing deals and contracts, always looking for the quickest way to the top. He started by selling cheap electronics at the market, then moved on to bigger things he never explained. Soon his visits home became shorter. His excuses became longer. The first time David was truly ashamed of him, Samuel felt it like a physical blow. David had brought a girl home, a pretty thing named Gloria, whose father owned a chain of pharmacies. Samuel, in his patched-up shirt, had offered her the only chair that didn't wobble. Gloria had smiled a tight, polite smile, her eyes scanning their one-room home with a look that was somewhere between pity and disgust. David never brought her back. A few months later, he moved out, claiming a business opportunity required him to live closer to the city center. He left behind an old mattress and a silence that was louder than any argument. Funk's departure was a slower, more painful ache. She was his heart, the one who understood his kindness. She excelled in school, a bright shining star. She won a scholarship to a university in the East, a place so far it felt like another country. "I'll study hard, Baba," she promised on the day she left, tears streaming down her face as she hugged him. "I'll become a doctor. I'll come back and build you a big house, and you will never have to work again." Samuel believed her. He sold the few valuable things he had left, his wife's old sewing machine and a small gold ring, to give Funk pocket money for her journey. For the first year, she called every week. In the second year, the calls came once a month. By the third year, they stopped. Her line was always busy, or she was in class, or she was studying. Then came the news, not from her, but from a distant relative. Funk had met a man, the son of a wealthy politician. They were getting married. "She says she will send for you when they are settled," the relative had said. But the tone was hollow. Samuel knew he had been shed like an old skin she no longer needed. The final anchor came loose when his landlord, a man who had shown him patience for years, finally lost it. The rent was 3 months late. "Samuel, I am sorry," he said, avoiding his eyes, "but I have my own family to feed." The eviction was quiet and humiliating. Samuel packed his life into 2 worn-out Ghana must-go bags. He carefully placed the biscuit tin with Maria's photograph on top of his folded clothes. He stood outside the room that had been his home for over 20 years, a stranger on his own street. He had nowhere to go. David's number no longer worked, and he didn't even know where Funk lived. He was utterly, completely alone. He slept in bus stations and on the cold steps of locked-up shops for 2 weeks before he found work. It wasn't the kind of work you find, but the kind you accept when all other doors are closed. He became a street cleaner for the city council, given a faded orange jacket, a wide broom made of palm fronds, and a long metal picker. His route was the pre-dawn quiet of Bodija Market. He would sweep away the debris of the previous day, the crushed peppers, the discarded wrappers, the dust of 1,000 footsteps before the city woke up. He who had once owned so little was now sweeping away what others owned and threw away. He became a ghost in an orange jacket, his back permanently stooped, his face hidden under the brim of an old hat. People looked through him, their eyes passing over him as if he were part of the scenery, as unremarkable as a lamppost or a pile of rubbish. The lowest point, the moment that finally shattered the last piece of his spirit, came on a bright Saturday afternoon. He heard through the city's vibrant grapevine of gossip that his son David was getting married. It was a lavish affair at a new expensive event center on the outskirts of the city. No invitation had come for him, but a desperate, foolish hope bloomed in his chest. "He is my son, my blood. I must see him on his wedding day." He spent his last savings on a new bar of soap and washed his best clothes, a faded shirt and trousers that had been mended so many times the patches had patches. He walked the 5 miles to the venue because he couldn't afford the bus fare. When he arrived, he was breathless. Music poured from the gleaming white building. Cars, shiny and black, were parked in neat rows. Beautiful people in colorful, expensive Aso oak fabric drifted through the entrance like butterflies. Samuel hesitated at the gate, feeling a crushing wave of inadequacy. He took a deep breath and walked in, clutching a small, wrinkled envelope containing the 200 he had saved as a wedding gift. He just wanted a glimpse of David. He was spotted immediately. A woman dripping with gold jewelry and dressed in lace, the color of the sun, stopped dead in her tracks, her nose wrinkled. She was Gloria's mother, the bride's mother. "Who is this?" she asked loudly, her voice slicing through the happy chatter. Heads turned. All eyes fell on Samuel. "Security, how did this beggar get in here?" Samuel's heart hammered against his ribs. I am the groom's father," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. Gloria's mother let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "You, David's father. Don't be ridiculous. David told us his father passed away years ago." Just then David himself appeared, drawn by the commotion. He was dressed in a magnificent white agbada, looking like a king. He saw Samuel and the color drained from his face. His confident smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure horror and shame. "David," Samuel said, taking a hopeful step forward. "Baba," David whispered, his eyes wide with panic. He glanced at his new mother-in-law, at the watching crowd, at his beautiful bride, who was now approaching with a confused frown. "David, who is this man?" Gloria's father, a large man with a booming voice, demanded. Samuel looked at his son, pleading with his eyes, "Defend me. Acknowledge me, I am your father." David's moment of decision came and went in a heartbeat. He straightened his shoulders, his face hardening into a cold, unfamiliar mask. He wouldn't look at Samuel. He looked at his father-in-law. "I don't know who he is," David said. The lie tearing through the air, he must be confused. He's just a homeless man who wandered in. Then he turned to Samuel, his voice low and venomous. "You need to leave now. You are ruining my wedding day. This is not a place for you." The words were worse than a slap. They were an eraser. In that moment, Samuel ceased to be a father. He was just a worthless burden, a stain on his son's perfect new life. He didn't say another word. The disgust on his son's face and the mocking laughter of the guests were all the answer he needed. He turned around, his shoulders slumped, the 200 gift still clutched in his hand. He walked away from the music and the light, his world shrinking until it was nothing but the shame burning in his chest. Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers away, a different story was being written. Janet's life, which had started in the same storm that drowned Samuel's hopes, was now a blazing fire. The 500 Samuel had given her was just enough. It had paid for the doctor's immediate attention and the first dose of medicine that stopped her mother's crisis. It didn't save her mother, the illness was too deep. But it gave them 3 more weeks together, 3 weeks of holding hands, of whispered stories, of a peaceful goodbye instead of a panicked one. That gift of time became the fuel for Janet's entire life. After her mother's passing, she was alone. She became a housemaid for a kind but busy family in Lagos. She scrubbed floors and washed clothes. But at night, while the family slept, she devoured the books in their library. She read about history, about science, about business. She taught herself English until it was as fluent as her native Yoruba. Her employer noticed her hunger. She saw the light in the young girl's eyes and helped her apply for a community scholarship. Janet won it easily. She enrolled in the University of Lagos to study computer science. She was relentless. While other students partied, she studied in the library until the guards kicked her out. She took on extra jobs tutoring and cleaning to send herself through school, haunted by the memory of a helpless girl in the rain and the kind man who had shown her mercy. Her final year project was her turning point. She developed a simple idea for a mobile application. It was a platform that allowed people without bank accounts, market women, small traders, people like her mother had been, to save tiny amounts of money digitally, securely, using just their phones. It was a fintech solution born from real pain. A professor saw the genius in its simplicity and connected her with a small group of angel investors. They were skeptical at first. Who was this young woman with no family name and an intense, burning fire in her eyes? But she spoke with a passion and clarity that was impossible to ignore. She didn't just talk about code and profit margins. She talked about her mother. She talked about dignity. She talked about empowerment. They gave her a small amount of seed funding. It was all she needed. Her company, which she named AO, the Yoruba word for money, exploded. It met a need no one else was seeing. Within 5 years, it was the fastest growing fintech company in West Africa. Janet, the orphan housemaid, became a name whispered in boardrooms. She was no longer just a survivor. She was becoming an empire builder, her path rising in a steep, brilliant line, destined to one day intersect with the quiet, forgotten man who was still sweeping the streets in the dark, his own path having fallen into a valley of despair. Lagos was a different beast from Ibadan. If Ibadan was a steady, noisy drumbeat, Lagos was a symphony of roaring ambition, a city that glittered with promises and devoured souls with equal enthusiasm. It was here, in the heart of this sprawling, chaotic metropolis, that Samuel found himself standing at the entrance of the Eco Hotel, feeling like a single forgotten grain of sand on a vast sparkling beach. He had come here on the fragile wings of a borrowed hope, an old friend from his neighborhood in Ibadan, a kind man named Joseph who now worked as a driver for a wealthy family in Lagos, had told him about the event. It was the annual Lagos Innovate and Invest Gala, a place where dreams were funded and futures were forged. Baba Samuel, Joseph had said, his eyes earnest, I hear them talk about it. Big wealthy people will be there looking for new ideas. They give money to people. Maybe you can tell someone your story. Maybe they can help you get a small loan to start a little shop. Anything is better than the broom. The idea was absurd, a tiny flicker of light in his deep darkness, but it was the only light he had. Joseph, in his kindness, had lent him a suit. It was a heavy, dark gray suit from a decade ago, a little too tight in the shoulders and too loose around the waist. He had also given him the bus fare to Victoria Island. And so Samuel, the street cleaner from Ibadan, had put on the costume of a man with prospects and had come to the city of dreams. The moment he stepped inside the grand ballroom, he knew he had made a mistake. The air itself felt expensive, thick with the scent of foreign perfumes and the crisp chill of powerful air conditioning. A chandelier bigger than his entire old room hung from the ceiling like a galaxy of captured stars, casting a brilliant light on the people below. They moved with an easy confidence he had never known, their conversations a low, powerful hum, their laughter light and effortless. Men in sharp, tailored suits and women in dresses that shimmered like liquid jewels held glasses of champagne, their wrists glittering with gold watches. Samuel felt his borrowed suit shrink around him. He was an imposter, a crow that had wandered into a garden of peacocks. He tried to make himself small, to melt into the edges of the room. He clutched the small, laminated proposal. He and Joseph had written out a humble plan to open a small food kiosk, but his hands were sweating so much the paper felt damp. His first attempt to speak to someone was a disaster. He saw a young man standing alone, looking important with a tablet in his hand. Samuel approached him politely. "Good evening, sir. My name is Samuel. I have an idea I would." The young man glanced at him, his eyes flicking over Samuel's ill-fitting suit and worn-out shoes. He gave a small, dismissive smirk and turned his back without a word, resuming his scrolling. The rejection was a silent, sharp slap. A little later, a waiter carrying a tray of small chops walked past. Samuel hadn't eaten since the small piece of bread he'd had that morning. He reached for a puff, but the waiter pulled the tray back sharply. "This is for guests, old man," he said with a sneer, before moving on to offer the snacks to a laughing group nearby. Shame burned in Samuel's throat. He felt a desperate urge to run, to flee back to the familiar anonymity of his broom and the pre-dawn quiet. But the memory of his son's wedding held him in place. He had run away then. He would not run again. He had to try. He saw a group of older men laughing loudly. One of them, a stout man with a booming voice and a large gold ring, seemed to be the center of attention. This must be an important person, Samuel thought. Summoning every last ounce of his courage, he moved towards the group, waiting for a pause in their conversation. As he got closer, he stumbled slightly on the thick carpet, bumping the arm of the very man he meant to approach. A few drops of the man's red wine splashed onto the sleeve of his brilliant white agbada. The man stopped laughing instantly. He looked down at the tiny red stain as if it were a mortal wound. Then his eyes, cold and furious, snapped up to meet Samuel's. "Are you blind?" The man boomed, his voice echoing in a sudden lull in the ballroom's noise. People turned to look. "Watch where you are going, old man. Do you have any idea how much this garment costs? It is pure Swiss lace." Samuel's face went pale. "I am so sorry, sir. It was an accident, please forgive me." The man, Chief Adelaja, was not in a forgiving mood. He seemed to relish the audience. "What is a person like you even doing in a place like this?" He continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is a gathering for innovators, for the future of Nigeria, not for relics. Did you sweep your way in here?" A few people in the crowd snickered. The cruel joke landed perfectly, a direct hit on Samuel's hidden reality. He felt the blood drain from his face. He stood frozen, the public humiliation washing over him just as it had years ago. He was once again the beggar at the feast, the worthless burden, the man who did not belong. He wished the floor would swallow him whole. And then everything changed. The low hum of the ballroom suddenly died, the laughter, the chatter, the music, it all faded into an abrupt, electric silence. The main doors of the ballroom had opened, and a woman had stepped inside. She wasn't dressed in flashy lace or blinding sequins. She wore a simple, exquisitely cut black gown that flowed around her as she walked. Her hair was pulled back, showing a face that was both beautiful and fiercely intelligent. She wasn't just a guest, she was an event. The organizers rushed towards her, their faces beaming with respect. Photographers who had been lingering outside jostled at the doorway, their cameras flashing like lightning. Whispers erupted in the silent room. "It's her. That's Janet Okoro, the CEO of AO, the youngest self-made billionaire in the country." Chief Adelaja, the man who had been berating Samuel, instantly forgot him. His face transformed, the anger replaced by a greedy, ambitious smile. He straightened his agbada and stepped forward, positioning himself to intercept her. Janet's eyes, calm and perceptive, scanned the room. They swept over the fawning organizers, the powerful investors, and the hopeful entrepreneurs. Then they stopped. They locked onto the small, stooped figure of an old man in a borrowed suit, standing alone and defeated in the center of the room. The CEO mask on her face melted away. For a fleeting second, it was replaced by the face of a little girl lost in a storm. Her breath hitched, her purposeful stride never faltered, but its direction was now locked like a missile on its target. "Madam CEO, a true pleasure to have you grace us with your presence," Chief Adelaja boomed, stepping directly into her path with a wide, oily smile. Janet Okoro walked past him as if he were a ghost. She didn't even turn her head. Her eyes were fixed on Samuel, and they were beginning to shine with unshed tears. The entire room watched, utterly mystified, as this titan of industry, this queen of African fintech, walked away from the most powerful people in the room and straight towards the man they had all just dismissed as a beggar. Samuel was confused. He saw her coming towards him and assumed he was in the way of someone important. He tried to step aside to make himself even more invisible, but she mirrored his movement, her gaze never leaving his. She stopped directly in front of him. The silence in the room was now so total, so absolute, that it felt like you could hear a heart beating. Samuel looked up into her face, a face he did not recognize, and saw an emotion so powerful it stunned him. Then, in an act that sent a shock wave through the entire Lagos elite, Janet Okoro, the billionaire CEO, slowly, gracefully, knelt down on the plush carpet at the feet of the old man in the ill-fitting suit. She looked up at him, her voice clear and strong, yet trembling with years of pent-up emotion. It carried across the silent room. "Baba," she said, a word of deep familial respect. "I have been looking for you for so long. I found you." Samuel stared, his mind reeling in utter confusion. "Madam, please get up. What is this? I don't understand." Janet shook her head, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. She turned her head just enough for those nearest to them, for a terrified Chief Adelaja, to hear her next words clearly. "This man," she announced, her voice ringing with power and conviction, "this man saved my life." Chaos erupted. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. People surged forward, their minds trying to process the impossible scene. Chief Adelaja's jaw dropped, his face turning a sickly pale white. The waiter who had denied Samuel food looked like he was about to faint. The young man who had snubbed him stared in horror. They hadn't just insulted an old man. They had insulted the savior of the most powerful woman in the room. And Samuel just stood there staring down at the kneeling woman, his mind racing back through the years through a torrential downpour in Ibadan, searching for the memory of a little girl with panicked eyes and a lost black bag. The chaos in the ballroom was a storm of whispers and wide-eyed stares. Chief Adelaja was desperately trying to apologize, his booming voice now a pathetic wheezing plea. A misunderstanding, Madam CEO, a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. If I had only known who he was to you. Janet rose slowly from her knees, never letting go of Samuel's hand. Her poise was chilling. She looked not at the groveling chief, but at the silent, watching crowd. Her voice, though not raised, cut through the entire room. "There is no misunderstanding, Chief," she said, her words cold and precise. "You saw a man you believed to be poor and unimportant, and you treated him with contempt. You didn't know him. That is the only truth that matters." She then looked directly at Samuel, her expression softening only for him. "Baba, please, let's go somewhere quiet. I have so much to tell you." Samuel, still reeling, could only nod. He felt like a man in a dream, his mind struggling to catch up with reality. This powerful, elegant woman, the little girl from the storm, it seemed impossible. He allowed her to lead him, her grip on his hand firm and protective. She guided him away from the stunned crowd, through a set of double doors and into a quiet, lavishly furnished private suite. An assistant respectfully closed the doors behind them, shutting out the noise of the world. The suite was silent. Samuel looked around at the plush sofas and polished wood, then back at the woman standing before him. He was still trying to reconcile the fierce CEO from the gala with the gentle woman beside him, and both with the memory of the little girl. "Madam," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "my mind is old. I am trying to understand." "Don't call me madam," she said gently, her eyes shining with tears. "You never called me that before. You called me little one." She took a step closer. "Baba, think back. Many, many years ago, a terrible rainstorm at Dug Market. A little girl was crying. She had lost everything. She had lost her mother's hospital money in a little black bag." The words were a key turning a lock deep inside his memory. The scene flooded back to him not as a faint echo, but in vivid color: the roaring rain, the churning muddy water, the desperate sobbing face of a child. He remembered her name. "Janet," he whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Little Janet." "Yes, Baba," she said, her voice breaking. "It's me." Samuel sank onto one of the sofas, his legs suddenly unable to support him. He stared at her, tracing the lines of her face, trying to see the child within the powerful woman, and he could. He saw it in her eyes, the same intensity, the same fire he had seen all those years ago. "But how?" he breathed. "You look at you and look at me." He gestured to his borrowed suit, to his calloused hands. "You did this, Baba," she explained, her voice filled with a lifetime of gratitude. "That 500 you gave me, it was everything. It didn't save my mother's life, but it gave us 3 more weeks together. It gave her a peaceful end, and it gave me a reason to live. I promised myself I would never be helpless again, and I promised God that if I ever made it, I would find you and repay you." She told him everything. Her voice was steady as she recounted the years of struggle working as a housemaid, studying by candlelight, the scholarship, the single-minded focus at university. She told him about her company, AO, and the simple idea born from her own mother's plight. "I've been searching for you for the last 7 years," she said, a hint of frustration in her voice. "I hired private investigators. They went to your old address in Ibadan, but you were gone. The landlord said you'd been evicted. No one knew where you went. They said you just vanished. I never stopped looking." She leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Tonight, I almost didn't come. I was tired. But my company is the main sponsor of this gala. I had to make an appearance. I came here tonight expecting to listen to boring speeches and shake a few hands. I never, ever imagined." She trailed off, shaking her head in wonder, "that I would find the man who started it all. The man who made my first and most important investment." Samuel could not speak. He could only listen, his heart a chaotic mix of shock, joy, and a profound sense of wonder at the mysterious ways of God. Samuel Attawale, a forgotten street cleaner, was the reason this incredible empire existed. The single act of kindness he had shown, an act that had earned him the scorn of his own son, had blossomed into this. As if on cue, the doors to the suite burst open without a knock. Two figures rushed in, their faces flushed with frantic energy. It was David, his son, and his wife, Gloria. David's eyes, wide and greedy, scanned the room before locking on Samuel. The shame and disgust he'd shown at his wedding were gone, replaced by a look of triumphant discovery. "Baba," he shouted, rushing forward, "we saw the video. It's all over the internet. We were so worried. We have been looking everywhere for you for years." Before Samuel could even process the arrival of his son, two more people appeared in the doorway. It was Funk, his daughter, and her husband, a man who looked as sleek and polished as his expensive shoes. Funk's face was a mask of tearful relief, though her eyes darted nervously towards Janet. "Oh, Baba," she cried, her voice theatrical, "we just heard. We came as fast as we could. We thought we had lost you forever." They descended on him like vultures, a flurry of fake concern and possessive hands. "He's coming with us," David announced, looking at Janet as if she were a rival. "He's our father. We will take care of him now." Samuel sat frozen, his heart turning to lead. The lies were so bold, so shameless, they stole the air from his lungs. But Janet did not move. She simply stood up, placing herself between Samuel and his children. She crossed her arms, and the warmth in her eyes turned to ice. "You've been looking for him?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Yes, for years," David insisted, puffing out his chest. Janet gave a small, humorless smile. "That's interesting, because my investigators with all their resources couldn't find him. Yet you, his children who claim to have been searching so desperately, were nowhere to be found. But a video of him with a billionaire goes viral and suddenly you appear in under an hour. What a coincidence." David and Funk froze. The atmosphere in the room grew cold. "I don't know who you are," David started, trying to sound authoritative. "I am the person who cares what happens to this man," Janet shot back, her voice like steel, "and you are the people who threw him away." She took a step toward David. "Let's talk about your wedding, shall we? My team was very thorough. They found the name of the catering company you used. It's amazing what people remember when you offer them a generous donation to their business. They remember a homeless man being thrown out. They remember the groom telling everyone he didn't know him. They remember you telling your father he was a worthless burden ruining your big day." The color drained from David's face. Gloria, his wife, looked at him in horror. Then Janet turned her icy gaze on Funk. Funk shrank back, her fake tears drying on her cheeks. "And you, Funk," Janet said, her voice laced with disappointment, "the loving daughter who was going to build him a mansion. You live in a beautiful estate in Lekki. My company has your alumni records from Unilag. We know your address, your husband's name, your phone number. You haven't been hiding. You just haven't been calling. Was it so hard to pick up a phone? To send some money to the father who sold his wife's ring to pay for your transport? He didn't even know if you were alive." Silence, utter, devastating silence. The children stood exposed, their greed and neglect laid bare under the bright, unforgiving lights of the suite. There were no more lies to tell. Samuel finally found his voice. He looked at his two children, the boy he had raised and the girl he had adored. There was no anger left in him, only a vast, aching sadness. "Why?" he asked. the single word heavy with the weight of years of loneliness. "My children, why?" They had no answer. David stared at the floor in shame. Funk covered her face and began to sob. But this time the tears were real hot tears of guilt and public humiliation. They hadn't come to save their father. They had come to claim their prize, only to find that the truth had gotten there first. The silence that filled the suite after his children left was heavy, thick with the ghosts of broken promises. Samuel sat on the plush sofa, a frail figure in a vast, quiet room, the echo of his daughter's sobs still hanging in the air. He wasn't celebrating a victory. He was mourning a loss. The wealth and recognition he had just gained felt hollow when measured against the love he had just been shown was never real. Janet came and sat beside him, not speaking, simply offering her presence as a quiet anchor. After a long while, Samuel finally looked up, his old eyes clouded with a deep, weary sadness. "A man is only as rich as his family," he whispered. The words an old proverb now tasted like ash in his mouth. "Today I have learned that I am the poorest man in the world." "No, Baba," Janet said softly, placing her hand over his. Her touch was warm and firm. "You are not poor. You invested your love in them and they squandered it. That is their loss, not yours. Your real wealth, the kindness you gave to a stranger in a storm. That investment has been growing for years, and tonight it has come home." She looked at him, her gaze clear and unwavering. "They are not your family anymore, Baba. I am. Let me be your daughter. Let me take care of you." A few days later, the storm of news about the gala had settled into a steady hum. The name Samuel Adewale was no longer a mystery. He was now known across Nigeria as the father of kindness, the humble man who had unknowingly sparked the rise of a billionaire. Janet came for him. She didn't send a driver, she came herself. The car that pulled up to the dingy, forgotten corner of Ibadan, where he had been staying with his friend Joseph, was a sleek black Lexus. It moved silently, a creature from another world on the dusty, potholed street. Samuel, dressed in new simple clothes that Janet had bought for him, said a heartfelt goodbye to Joseph, pressing a thick envelope of cash into his friend's hand, a gift from Janet that was more money than Joseph had ever seen. The journey from Ibadan to wherever they were going was surreal. Samuel had only ever known the loud, cramped chaos of public buses. Now he sat on soft leather seats that felt like a cloud. The air was cool, and the world outside slid by behind tinted windows, its noise muffled and distant. He looked at Janet, who sat beside him, quietly working on a tablet. He was still trying to reconcile the fierce CEO from the gala with the gentle woman beside him. "Where are we going, my child?" he asked softly. "We are going home," she answered with a smile, not looking up from her screen, "back to Ibadan." "But my old place is gone," he said, confused. "We are not going to the old home," Janet said. "We are going to the new one." The car turned off the main road and into a quiet, serene neighborhood he had only ever passed from a distance. The streets were lined with trees and beautiful high-walled houses. The car slowed and turned towards a set of large, elegant black gates which swung open silently. They drove into a spacious compound, beautifully landscaped with green grass and bright flowers, and stopped in front of a stunning modern house. It wasn't a gaudy palace, but a masterpiece of glass, wood, and white stone. It was peaceful, strong, and dignified. It looked like a home built for a king. A kind-faced, smiling woman in her 50s, dressed in a neat wrapper and blouse, came out to greet them. "Welcome home, madam." "Welcome home, Baba," she said with a respectful bow. "Baba, this is Mrs. Bolus," Janet said. "She is a retired nurse, and she will be helping you manage the house. She is a wonderful cook, and she will be here to make sure you want for nothing." Samuel stepped out of the car and simply stared. He looked at the house, at the beautiful garden, at the kind face of Mrs. Bolus. He walked as if in a trance through the front door into a bright, airy living room. The furniture was simple but elegant. Sunlight streamed through the large windows. On one of the walls hung a single large framed photograph. It was a picture of his late wife, Maria. It was the photo from the old biscuit tin, now beautifully restored, and enlarged her smiling face, radiating warmth throughout the entire house. That was what broke him. The years of pain, of loneliness, of humiliation at the wedding, at the gala, in the silent nights sleeping on cold steps, it all came undone. He stood in the center of the impossible room, in front of the impossible portrait of his long-lost wife, and he began to cry, deep, shuddering sobs that shook his entire body. It was the sound of a dam breaking after a lifetime of holding back the flood. Janet was there holding his arm, letting him weep. After his tears subsided, she led him to a comfortable armchair. She sat opposite him and placed a slim leather-bound folder on the coffee table. "I have one more thing for you, Baba," she said. She opened the folder. Inside was a beautifully printed certificate. "My company has a charitable arm. We build schools, provide scholarships, and help families in crisis. Families like mine was. It is the most important part of my work." She slid the certificate across to him. "I have officially renamed it. It is now the Okoro Adewale Foundation, after my mother and after you. Its work is built on the foundation of your kindness. It is only right that you are its leader." Samuel looked at the document. His name was printed in elegant gold letters. "Mr. Samuel Adewale, Honorary Chairman for Life *." He looked up from the paper, his eyes swimming in fresh tears. He looked at the portrait of his wife, at the incredible woman before him, at the impossible grace that had found him in the twilight of his life. "All those years," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion, "I had nothing. I thought God had forgotten me. I never expected that a single act of kindness, a single 500 note, would bring me such grace." Janet smiled a tender, beautiful smile. The tears in her own eyes shone like diamonds. "That's where you're wrong, Baba. It wasn't the note. It was the heart that gave it." She paused, then her smile turned a little mischievous, a little secret. "And I have one final thing to show you." She reached into her expensive handbag and pulled something out. It was small, old, and made of cheap, cracked black plastic. It was a little girl's handbag. It was worn and fragile, a relic from another lifetime. Samuel stared at it, his breath catching in his throat. With gentle fingers, Janet opened the clasp on the old bag. She reached inside and pulled out a small, clear plastic sleeve. And inside the sleeve, faded, crumpled, and soft from the passage of 2 decades, was a 500 note. She placed it on the table between them. "I still have the bag," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "and I still have the money. I never spent it. I couldn't. I used the small savings I had from my chores to pay the doctor that day. This note was too precious. It was hope. It was proof that there was goodness in the world. It was my reason to keep fighting. I kept them both all these years." Samuel looked at the note, the very same piece of paper that had represented his children's lost feast, a symbol of his own sacrifice. It hadn't been the payment for a miracle. It had been the seed of one. It was a promise, and it had been kept. She never expected a poor man's kindness to spark an empire. He never expected a street girl to become his savior. In the bustling streets of Nigeria and in the quiet corners of the human heart, the lesson remains the same. The smallest seed of goodness, planted with a pure heart, can grow into a forest of blessings. Kindness always comes full circle. This story of Samuel and Janet teaches us that our lives can change in an instant, and that the path we walk is often completely unexpected. It shows us that no matter how difficult our struggles are, a heart filled with kindness and a spirit that refuses to give up will always find its way to the light. It's a powerful reminder to never look down on anyone, because you never know the king or queen hiding in the clothes of a simple person. True worth isn't in a bank account or a fancy title. It's in the goodness we show to others when no one is watching. It's about seeing the humanity in a person's eyes and offering a hand when they have fallen. To my amazing audience who followed this journey, what did you learn from Samuel and Janet's story? What was your favorite moment? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly love reading what you have to say. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up to let me know you enjoyed it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story we share together. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you in the next one.